Hi BookTube, and welcome to a new video, although I'm not talking about books today. So like everyone, for the past 21 months or so I've been taking in information and making calculations and assessments and adapting my behaviour accordingly, which is why I feel that I haven't really wanted to sort of say anything in public or even commit any of my fiction writing around the pandemic, because we are all making assessments as individuals. One would hope that the information we're getting is consistent, but it isn't. So I just don't feel that putting my voice out there up till now would really sort of, have any authority or contribute anything particularly to the debate. I did do one pandemic tag early on during lockdown, but other than that I've committed nothing of my thoughts on it. But a couple of factors have sort of coalesced in the last week or so, which means that I really feel now I do want to say something publicly. So in the UK we have Sky News as one of our sort of news channels, and during the week they do a preview of the following morning's front pages of the newspapers. They do a review of it. And they have sort of guest journalists, think tank people, political PR people. And last week, one of these commentators said on a couple of occasions when they were talking some story about COVID and the government's latest reaction to it, and he said everybody will catch COVID. As I say, he said it a couple of times. And at the time I was horrified, but it's taken me a week to sort of try and get my thoughts together as to why I was horrified by that statement. So that's what I want to talk about today. So the first thing to say about the statement that everyone will catch COVID is that it goes against the current government thinking of the way to beat the pandemic is to get vaccinated, because it's breaking the link between good health and vaccination, because it's saying, well, we're all going to get it. So there's, it's almost sort of throwing your hands up and saying, giving an excuse to the people who haven't been vaccinated so far, and saying, well, why should I get vaccinated if I'm going to catch it anyway? And I think that's a really damaging message to be getting across. To me, it's just the spectre of herd immunity by another name, which the Conservative right, or a part of the Conservative right, seems absolutely wedded to as a strategy. But as I say, it goes against the current sort of rationale of sort of immunisation and vaccination. So I think it's a very dangerous message to be spreading. And one almost conjures up the idea of, in parallel to the drive to get everybody double vaccinated and boosted before the new year to head off the Omicron variant, that there should be a parallel programme of those who refuse steadfastly to get vaccinated should maybe sort of have a programme where they go to COVID wards and inhale with no PPE and no masks, so that they catch the virus and get it out of the way, because everyone's going to catch COVID apparently. I mean, I find this really, really troubling. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, there is a huge problem, which I have found consistently with the people who lean towards this sort of free market, Britain must remain open at all costs for business attitude in the midst of the pandemic. And that is, they seem prepared to write off the lives of the vulnerable, of the elderly, of people with underlying health conditions, of people who have sort of socioeconomic vulnerabilities. We all know who the bulk of the people who in the early days of the pandemic who died, what social class they came from, what ethnicity they tended to be, and these are people who were, living in crowded conditions and working in jobs where they had to keep going out and exposing themselves. And it seems to me that the holders of these ideas are people who are prepared to write off the lives of these people. Yes, Omicron might be more mild, although we don't know, but there are still people getting hospitalised and there are still people dying. And it seems that, well, we should all just let ourselves catch it is prepared for this cost of human life, where, you know, all lives matter. That's another, you know, thing that, in a parallel protest that came from the far right of the Conservative Party. Well, all lives don't seem to matter by this rationale. It's just not a very Christian spirit to sort of be prepared to write off, you know, a proportion of people's lives in order to keep Britain open for business. So again, I find this very troubling. And although that this variant of the virus in Omicron might be sort of less damaging to health, who's to say that the next variant doesn't retain Omicron's ease of transmission, but with far greater health threat to health? So that's the second thing. The third thing is, I really don't understand this mentality. You know, as I said, like everyone, I have adjusted my behaviour, I've made sacrifices over the last 21 months, and now I'm supposed to give all that up and just tamely accept that I'm going to catch it anyway. What was the point of the sacrifice for the last 21 months? Yes, I know Delta was more sort of damaging potentially to health than Omicron, but as, you know, there are still people who will fall victim to Omicron. So I don't accept that, you know, those sacrifices were not worth it, were pointless, because we should just accept that we're going to catch it anyway. It's like sort of sending your troops over to fight a war abroad and then shunning them when they come out, whether they're victorious or defeated. I just don't understand it. And while we all have a notion sort of broadly of our immune systems in terms of I catch a lot of colds, or I don't catch colds, I get flu every year, or I've never taken a day off work, you know, we have a broad general outline of our immune systems, but we don't know, and we cannot predict that if we contract whatever variant of COVID-19, how our immune system is going to cope with it, because the virus has different ways of attacking us. You know, the first way is to compromise our lungs, to reduce our lung capacity, and that's when you get sort of, you know, sort of pneumonia type symptoms, and that can kill you. There's the viral load, where the viral nature goes to town on your organs, much like AIDS did, and with the AIDS crisis, the key breakthrough in the end was the discovery of antivirals, and antivirals are very important in the fight against COVID for those who are hospitalised. There's also the way that the virus can use your immune system against you and sort of turn it into a massive sort of overreaction by your immune system, sort of an overkill that does more damage than good. So there's lots of different ways that the virus can really harm you, and we as lay people do not have any idea how our body is disposed, and the likelihood of our body to, you know, that our lungs would be compromised, or that our immune systems would go into overdrive, you know, all that sort of stuff. So again, to sort of blithely say we're all going to catch COVID, that brings no comfort or relief, because I may be one of the people who, you know, my immune system does me in. So I cannot accept on any rationale this notion of we're all going to catch COVID. And now my personal story about it. So I have a 23-year-old, or I have twin 23-year-old boys. They both caught the Delta variant at university in a shared house back in August. My son graduated, finished his masters, and is working in the NHS, albeit in the mental health side of things rather than the medical side. And the nature of the beast, to become qualified as a clinical psychologist, is you have to do basically volunteer work in a psychiatric unit, which he is doing. But because it's volunteer work, he's not getting paid, which means he's living at home while he's doing this and commuting to the south coast from London 2 days, started off 3 days a week, but now it's 2 days a week. And he contracted Omicron, one of the first in the country to contract it. It was very early on. He thinks he contracted it from the train journey. And we all know that a lot of people have not, up till now, were not wearing masks, even though that, you know, the encouragement was wear masks. So once he took a lateral flow test and it was positive, he told us, and socially isolated behind his bedroom door in the house. I just want to point out that social isolation is a complete myth for those who, in a shared house with, where there aren't ensuite bathrooms. The adults in the house instigated a very draconian regime on him, in that we served all his food on paper plates with wooden cutlery that were disposable, left outside his door. He would take it in and then just throw the plates and stuff away in bin liners that we had provided. But after 10 days, the smell of that must have been fairly unbearable, because we weren't prepared to touch the rubbish bags. He couldn't have a bath. He voluntarily wore a mask all the time except when he was asleep. It was a pretty stiff regime. But miracle of miracles, the adults in the house did not contract COVID. So again, that sort of gainsays the we will all contract COVID. I mean, maybe the adults in the house will in the future contract it, and maybe that commentator will be borne out. But with COVID in our house, under our roof, 2 adults did not contract COVID. So as I say, perhaps that gives the lie to the sentiment that we will all catch it. But that's not really what I wanted to talk about. What I want to talk about is the very unsatisfactory nature of, we don't know why we haven't caught COVID. So the first possibility is that all our precautions were so good that we didn't expose ourselves. I don't believe that. As I say, I think social isolation within a house is a myth, because you're bound to infect the other people in the house. So, it's possible, but we don't know. I don't think it was the precautions that we took, although I think we were very right, to take them. So the second reason is the adults in the house were not only double vaccinated, but boosted as well. So that maybe that provided the protection so that we were not going to contract the disease. Again, no way of knowing. We sent in PCR tests, the 3 of us, my infected son and the 2 adults, and his came back positive, and that's when they said it was the Omicron variant, and the 2 adults came back negative. But we sent that the day after he'd done his lateral flow test, so maybe we hadn't contracted it at that point, but we have since contracted it, but again are protected by the booster and the vaccine. We don't know though. We don't know. We haven't been retested. But what sort of slightly frustrates me, and sorry, I say that we may have contracted it, because the 2 adults have had coughs and are sneezing more than we normally do. Now that could be psychosomatic. It could be an erroneous perception that actually we're not sneezing and coughing any more than we are normally, or it could be we have a really, really mild set of symptoms. The frustration I feel is that the analysing body, having received 3 samples from the same house and given us the results, I have no idea, and I have had no information back as to the implications of that. As I say, we weren't told what our antibody levels were like on the basis of the booster. We were told we didn't have it at that point, but short of doing more PCR tests, we don't know. They've received 3 tests from the same house. A 20-year-old who'd been double vaccinated, but hadn't had the chance to have the booster because of this, days limit you're supposed to leave it, which they've now changed, making it up on the hoof. And the 2 adults, both had been double AstraZeneca, but one had had Pfizer booster and one had had Moderna booster. So I think there was potentially useful data to them that could have come out of this if they'd, say, compared to another household or set of households where both adults were both double vaccinated and boosted, but contracted, COVID from someone else living in the house. Those comparisons seem to me to be the absolute core of the data that should be being collected, and maybe it is being collected, but it's certainly not being fed back to us. On an individual level, we could have gained useful insight and knowledge as to, which of those options I gave. Is it that the precautions were sufficient in themselves, or is it that the booster protected us, or is it that we did actually contract COVID, but so mild as to not really notice? So that's my thoughts on it, really, on the whole thing, in reaction to this blithe, bland statement that we will all contract COVID. I agree it's the new reality. I agree it will be with us, probably forever, certainly within my lifetime. But then to draw the conclusion that we should almost accept that, and the implication being that government should therefore choose its responses to the pandemic in the light of the fact that everyone's going to get it, I reject that. I reject that 100%. I reject it because it writes off the lives of people who will succumb to it. I reject it because it breaks the through line that has been argued up to now, that the vaccines will defeat the pandemic. It breaks that link and that association in people's minds, which will discourage them from getting vaccinated. I reject it also, as I say, for the sacrifices that we've made. 170,000 people have died in the UK from this disease, or at least with the disease. And during the Spanish flu, straight after the First World War, 278,000 people died in Britain. So that's nearly a century ago, when you didn't have a national health service. The state of medical technology and pharma was not nearly as advanced as obviously it is now. And we're sort of, I don't know what the mass is, but 2/3 of the way there, and it's still ongoing, So I absolutely reject this notion that we should all just accept that we are going to catch COVID. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say. I welcome any comments below. Till next time, thanks very much.